Welcome to Inspired to Move, presented by Degree. I'm Roz Goldon-Woode, and today I'm here with Whoop co-founder and CEO, Will Ahmed. Will, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I want to get right to the inspiration. What was the inspiration and motivation to start Whoop, and how can data-driven wearable technology inspire people to move?
Well, I think at our core at Whoop, our mission is really to unlock human performance. And for me personally, that was really doing a lot of research around understanding the human body. I was always into sports and exercise personally. I was a college athlete. I was captain of the Harvard squash team. And I feel like I was someone who used to overtrain. So you get fitter and fitter and fitter, and then all of a sudden you sort of fall off a cliff. And it's the ultimate betrayal if you're an athlete. And look, other athletes get injured. They misinterpret fitness peaks. They don't necessarily understand the importance of sleep and recovery. And so I got very interested in this about 10 years ago. And so I was doing a lot of research as an undergraduate student, read 500 medical papers, wrote a thesis myself around how to understand the body. And that really became, I would say, the business plan for Whoop. And the thing that we were right about 10 years ago that now is very popular today is just the importance of understanding your body 24/7 and how sleep and recovery can make as big an impact on performance as anything else.
Yeah, I know you were a collegiate athlete at Harvard. You played squash. I played sports in college too. I played basketball, and even now as kind of a retired athlete, if you will, a regular person, I'm still trying to figure out my body. And
Nigerian national team, right?
hey, you did some study, a little bit of research.
Yeah, I did a little research.
That's that's why you smart. That's why you're 40 under Forbes 40 under 40 list as of late. So congratulations. I know that's a
Thank
new
you.
one of many accolades for you, Will. But you know, I knew that this started as a point of passion for you as a former athlete um, in college, and then you dove into the science, as you mentioned. So, how did you decide which indicators to track?
Yeah, the really interesting data that I found was on a statistic called heart rate variability, which for people listening to this, it's this weird lens into your autonomic nervous system. And your autonomic nervous system effectively governs everything that your body does. And I bring this up because previously, in order to measure the statistic, you needed an electrocardiogram, which is that huge $20,000 medical technology that you find in hospitals. And when I was doing the research, I was hearing about everyone from Olympic cyclists, power lifters, using HRV monitoring to understand their bodies. The CIA was using HRV to understand if someone was lying. It was being used to understand psychology. And so I said to myself, wow, this is a really powerful statistic. Even cardiologists were using HRV to predict heart attacks. And I thought, wow, this is a really powerful statistic, but no one could monitor it. I mean, you had this ridiculous contraption in hospitals is the only thing that could monitor it. And so I thought, okay, well, if we could measure your autonomic nervous system continuously, that would be a real breakthrough. And, along the way, we identified other statistics, heart rate being very important for obviously measuring exercise, movement being very important for measuring, daily activity, things around respiratory rate, your slow wave sleep, REM sleep, the disturbances throughout the night. And so I identified a lot of these different statistics. And then the really hard part was then figuring out how can you build this technology that I'm wearing to be able to measure all of it. But fortunately, that's what we've been able to do.
Show us the technology. Like, is it
Yeah.
cool looking, fashionable to you? Yeah, it's sleek.
Yeah. So I'm wearing the Whoop strap. This is the 3.0. You can see I've got a pretty epic tan line. And
You don't take that
yeah.
thing off.
And so this here has 6 sensors inside of it. It's measuring heart rate variability, skin connectivity, ambient temperature, accelerometry, and respiratory rate.
Wow.
So it's a lot in a small package. And it's largely material. So, this is all different types of material. There's lots of different bands that you can get. Here's another band. And you can swap them in and out and kind of dress it up however you'd like. And you can wear it on your wrist or your upper arm. So, a lot of the basketball players, for example, that wear Whoop will wear it on their upper arm under a sleeve or something. And really it's designed to be worn 24/7. You never take it off.
Right. So, right now we are fast forwarding years away from the origin of this, where you've got technology, you've got an app, you've got a platform. We discussed the passion, then the science behind it, but then you have this cool idea and you got to get some money behind it. You founded Whoop in 2012, and then you were able to raise over $100 million. Can you describe, first of all, just the development of this industry and what the process was like fundraising for Whoop?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. If you go back to 2012, really the only technology on the market then was the chest strap, the heart rate monitor,
I
and
remember that we wore that in practice.
yeah, everyone's horrible,
Yeah,
right?
they
Especially
stopped.
uncomfortable for women. Yeah. So, to me, that was like the most ridiculous technology. And it was from the 80s. And I was like, there's no reason that we should be wearing this.
Mm-hmm.
So that I felt very comfortable with displacing. Now, what was scarier is like in 2013, 2014, Nike came out with the Nike Fuel Band. And Nike made the mistake of really focusing on steps. And I had this bias that steps was actually an irrelevant metric. It wasn't important. And that was a somewhat contrarian point of view back then, because other products then would come out, Fitbit, Jawbone. These products also were really focused on steps. And the thing that I said to our team is, look, we're going to build technology that the best athletes in the world are actually going to be willing to pay us to wear, because it's going to be that good. And by the way, if we don't build great technology, they're not going to wear it no matter how much we pay them to wear it. And Nike actually proved this for us, fortunately, because they were paying athletes hundreds of millions of dollars, and none of those athletes wore a Nike Fuel Band. I mean, truly, not a single one of them wore it. And that to me was a sign that we were onto something. And in 2015, we had athletes like Michael Phelps and LeBron James wearing Whoop. And that was maybe when we had 100 other people in the world wearing Whoop. So it was a tiny number of people wearing Whoop, but we had these like amazing athletes, sort of once in a generation athletes wearing it. And that to us was very validating, because it said, okay, even though we're not making a lot of money, we have practically no revenue, we're not a business yet, we're building technology that can improve people that are this high performing. And so that was validating for us, in the market, so to speak, this idea that we could build technology that no one else had built. The years following that were really about, how do you turn that into a business? How do you make a consumer product that a lot of people will use and buy and pay for? What's the business model for that? And back to your question of raising $100 million. I mean, before you raise $100 million, you got to figure out how you raise $1 million. And before you raise $1 million, you got to figure out how you raise 100 grand. And I'll tell you what, we closed $55 million in Q4, and that was easier than raising the first 300 grand for the business. So any entrepreneur listening to this, you're having trouble raising your first $1 million or whatever, it's hard. I mean, that's the bottom line. It's hard. And it could get easier, actually. Like, your business relative to where you are might get better. And so for us, some of the hardest rounds of financing we raised were actually the early days, where it was less proven. I was less proven as a leader. I was 22 when I started the company. So it's like, it takes time. I think that's the bottom line. And the important thing too, for people who are aspiring to be entrepreneurs, is you want to just get a little bit better yourself every day. The mistake that you make, certainly the mistake I made, is you get down on yourself because you compare yourself to super seasoned entrepreneurs. You look at like Elon Musk or Jack Dorsey or Steve Jobs, and you're like, wow, they're doing that. I can't even do this. And the reality is, they probably were flat-footed the first day they started too, and so the key is along the way getting like a little bit better as you go. And I think that ties back to fundraising, but it ties back to a lot of other things in building a business.
Do tell, what's one way you improved over the course of this journey as a businessman and leader?
I mean, there's a lot that comes to mind. I think one thing that's very important is building a team, and as a young leader, I think I've been fortunate in that I've gotten to work with phenomenal people, really talented people. And the thing that you learn over time is that you want to hire really brilliant people, and you want to empower them. You know, you want to hire great people, and you want them to tell you what to do. And you know, sort of the wrong way to think about leadership is you hire people who are slightly less talented than you, and you tell them what to do. It's actually that you want to do completely the opposite, right? And that's something that I think takes a little bit of courage, because you're all of a sudden you're surrounding yourself with people that are more talented than you, and you know, sort of saying what should go on, and you're trying to manage all of that. And I think that's a really interesting, it's a really interesting leadership experience. You know, I bet a lot of people watching this watched The Last Dance, and one thing that was so cool about that documentary is how it showed Phil Jackson managing all these different personalities. Here was a guy who was able to manage Michael Jordan, who in himself was a crazy personality to be able to manage, right? Because super high performing, competitive person. But then over here you got Dennis Rodman, completely different person, right? And you can tell that he was managing those two people in completely different ways. And those are also super highly talented people. So anyway, that's all to say that I think the process of growing as a leader and really a manager is one that I'm proud of. But look, I'm still trying to get better. I mean, I haven't figured it out. In fact, the more you learn about it, the more you realize you got more to learn.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm sure this education and journey, it continues to be ongoing, but I absolutely can see the athlete in you, and the way you were able to make the comparison to The Last Dance and MJ, and, you know, just basically, like, you don't want to tell people what to do. You want to inspire them so that they move towards a realized equal goal for the whole community and the whole group and organization. So a part of this too, sometimes, is timing. So right now, perhaps an opportunity has presented itself. When COVID-19 hit, the world halted to a stop. What are some of the applications or potential that Whoop has to help people navigate life and COVID-19?
Well, you know, Whoop was founded really with two core principles. One was to ground everything that we do in research. Right? We differentiate as being a very research-driven company and business. And the second was to move at a really uncomfortable pace. Like, we like to move fast. We like to take it on. And it just turns out that the moment in time of COVID-19, where you've got a virus that's come out of nowhere, that all of a sudden is a global pandemic, presents itself well for a business that's set up to do research and move fast, right? And so for Whoop, we actually were cued to this pretty early on. We started doing research on COVID-19 in January, because one of our board members is a Silicon Valley expert, and he's a guy who just is an expert at understanding how small numbers become really large numbers. And so he said to me in mid-January, hey, this is going to be a global pandemic. I was actually wearing N95 masks on planes at the end of January. So that shows you kind of how early we were too. I looked ridiculous. I was the only person on flights wearing masks. Now, of course, everyone's wearing masks, and I feel less ridiculous. But, you know, we added COVID-19 tracking in the Whoop app by early March. First consumer product to have COVID-19 tracking in the app. And then by the end of March, we had thousands of responses of people who said they had tested positive for COVID-19. So what we were able to do is all of a sudden a ton of research. We're able to really take what is Whoop data, right? All of this different physiological data that we've been talking about. What does it look like before, during, and after COVID-19? And we were very quickly able to identify one statistic that Whoop measures that actually had incredible predictive power for COVID-19. And that statistic is respiratory rate. So we found that about 80% of cases could be identified by measuring an elevated respiratory rate. Now, 80% of cases isn't perfect, but it's a hell of a lot better than no information or nothing, right? And so that was quite powerful. And we partnered with research institutions to publish this information. You can read it online now. And a bunch of people really respond to this, not just the huge Whoop membership, but all these different organizations reached out to Whoop to better understand how they could use technology to predict COVID-19. I mean, the sports example, there's a lot of sports examples, but a very obvious one is in golf. professional golf was the first sport to come back. And at that point, this would have been early summer, probably about 40% of PGA Tour players were already wearing Whoop because they liked the technology, they liked using it. And one player, Nick Watney, he had been on Whoop for 10 months. And so, with the testing process, he would get tested. He got tested on Tuesday. He tested negative for COVID-19. Thursday, he's playing in the tournament. Friday, he wakes up and he looks at his Whoop. He looks in the app, right? And it says his respiratory rate had jumped off the page. So every day, his respiratory rate was a 14 breaths per minute. This really boring statistic, never changes, 14, 14, 14. He wakes up on Friday, it's an 18. It jumped off the page. I mean, that's not like 10% increase. That's a huge jump. And he goes to the doctors, the PGA Tour doctors, and he says, look, my respiratory rate's elevated. We'll put out this research. I think I should get tested again. There was a lot of back and forth. They said, look, you're cleared to play. You don't need to be tested. And finally, they tested him, and sure enough, he tested positive for COVID-19. And so he was able to quarantine and drop out of the tournament. Unfortunately, no one else was infected that weekend on tour. But even for 2 weeks, Nick was completely asymptomatic. He didn't really have any symptoms. But if you looked at his Whoop data, you could tell something was completely wrong in his body. And that's one example, but the PGA Tour learned of it. And within 24 hours, they procured over 1,000 Whoop straps for the entire tour, caddies, media, staff, you name it. And so we're now doing this across a bunch of different sports. We most recently announced the NFLPA with Patrick Mahomes, and every player in the NFL is going to have a Whoop. And it's exciting to be able to play a role, I think, during what otherwise is a pretty difficult time.
It's absolutely difficult. Right now it's been a fascinating storyline all summer. The idea of sports attempting to make a comeback or a return in the face of COVID-19, everything from technology and testing protocol and traveling and to bubble or not to bubble. So this technology being able to perhaps, see this coming before you actually get to that point would be really helpful for sports to have a chance to happen, and certainly for a greater application for COVID-19 and the greater population of everyone. But to come back to something you said, you guys have some really exciting partnerships in sports. You mentioned the PGA. I'll use the example you mentioned of the NFL Players Association. Every player is getting a Whoop strap. Besides being able to perhaps see some indications of maybe COVID-19 coming on, how else can Whoop elevate sports and elite athletes?
Well, we measure a lot around sleep, recovery, and strain. So what does that mean? So we measure the quality of an individual's sleep every night. And guess what? Turns out better sleep makes you a better athlete. And while that's not surprising to anyone, it's like you can't manage this stuff unless you measure it. How do you know if you slept well last night? It'd be like not keeping track of points during a game. Yeah, I thought I scored a lot of points. I don't know how many I had, but it felt like a lot. It's sort of ridiculous. And I think we'll look back on this moment in time in professional sports where athletes weren't measuring sleep. We're going to look at that sort of like, professional baseball players smoking in the dugout. I mean, it'll be that irresponsible. It seemed ridiculous. And the reality is, by measuring sleep and also measuring recovery, you can help an athlete truly understand what are all the different things in this person's life that are affecting how prepared they're going to be ultimately for training or for a game. And, and we measure athletes 24/7.
It's crazy that in some ways athletes can be part of like $1 billion industry, and so much is on the line, and we're basically for many athletes are just guessing how we feel. So it's awesome that there's this kind of data-driven approach to it. Now,
I'll give you a perfect example of this. So we work with a bunch of players in the NBA, and we have a point guard on Woo who, when he has a green recovery, right? So that means his body's well rested, his physiology looks very healthy, right? When he has a green recovery, his stat line looks like 22 points per game, 52% field goal percentage, and 1 turnover on average. These are his average statistics when he has a high recovery, okay? When he has a red recovery, so this is his rundown, right? averaged 18 points per game, 35% field goal percentage, and 8 turnovers.
Wow.
Right? Like those are literally two different athletes. I mean, it's the same person, but I'm telling you, two different athletes. This guy, max contract, NBA All-Star. This guy coming off the bench,
Mm-hmm.
right? So what does that individual need to do? They need to focus on their recovery, right? They've got all the talent in the world. They just need to be green 90% of the time, and they're going to be a better athlete. And so in some cases, it's that black and white.
Okay. What about the everyday person that's averaging 3 pancakes, 2 scrambled eggs, a walk to the office, a walk back home, and they're hanging out with their families at the end of the night? How can Whoop like inform and inspire everyday daily lives then?
Yeah, and look, to be clear, most of our population on Whoop is everyday folks. I think what holds Whoop members together is there's some level of motivation there. You know, this is a group of people that's motivated in their lives and in one way or another wants to improve. And for that individual, we can help them figure out how to get better sleep. You know, you want to be a better executive, you want to nail that pitch. All right, let's make sure that you get the right amount of sleep, your body's recovered leading into that. We help individuals figure out what are the right workouts for them on given days. You know, Whoop will give you a recovery every day, like I was talking about, and it'll say like you should crush a workout today. But it also might say, hey, you're run down and you should rest. You shouldn't exercise. You shouldn't do anything. You know, in some ways, Whoop is the first fitness products to tell you not to exercise, right? So, and then, you know, there's a lot of things that Whoop is also able to track around lifestyle and behavior. For example, you can report what diets you're taking or diets you're on or supplements you're taking or, you know, even things about relationships and everything else. And what Whoop will do is it'll tell you, okay, when you slept in your own bed, this is how well you slept versus not, or when you traveled or not, or when you took magnesium or not, melatonin or not. And you can start to do these sort of A/B tests on yourself. You start to figure out what's the perfect formula for me. And that in itself is how you inspire behavior change and you inspire performance gains.
For my job pre-COVID, I traveled all the time and found myself feeling worn out at times. And I think this would I'm absolutely excited to use it to kind of help me track what works for me and what doesn't, and maybe how to plan ahead.
Totally.
Yeah. And so one thing I do know, I cover the NBA, and I know that, you know, Whoop's not the only technology around. The NBA gave their players Aura rings. How do you view competition in this industry?
Well, I'll tell you how we think about success in general. Success is that when an athlete or anyone wears Whoop, they continue to use it and they get value out of it. And you have to think about product experiences, and then you can think about marketing. Product experiences, you put the product on, do you ever take it off? Are you getting value out of it? And fortunately, the players we've worked with in the NBA, that's the case. Marketing is, okay, we're going to pay for something to be in a gift bag, or we're going to pay to make an announcement with someone. Okay, maybe that drives revenue. But they're actually two separate things. And so when we think about competition, we're very focused on are we delivering the best product experience? Whether it's an athlete, whether it's a consumer, whether it's a researcher, are we delivering the best product experience? And I think what we've seen in the market is that we are. And so that's what gives us an edge. That's what we're driving to get a little better at every day. New features, new upgrades, really enhancing the product experience for our members.
What are the challenges then that Whoop and the entire industry as a whole face right now as you look towards future growth?
Well, I think first and foremost, you do have to deliver value. I mean, it's a very hard value proposition. We're asking you to wear something 24/7. And like I said, you're not going to wear it unless you get value out of it, right? How many things on your body do you wear 24/7? I mean, practically nothing, right? So that just shows you it's a huge leap to get someone to do that. You know, I think some other things are popping up as being quite important in the space. I think privacy of data, security of data, these are things we've taken very seriously since the beginning. If a big tech company enters the space like a Google or an Amazon, are you going to trust them with your personal data 24/7? I don't know, right? I don't know. And so I think that's where Whoop stays focused. Is we want to keep delivering the best product experience. We want our consumers to feel very comfortable with their data and owning their data. And then look, it's capitalizing on the fact that health monitoring is really here to stay. I think we're going to see this market explode over the next 5 years, and Whoop expects to be a big player in it.
So I think, one way to close this out is to look towards the future and make some predictions, if you will. How do you predict that Whoop and data-driven wearable technology will continue to inspire people to move and influence future lifestyle trends?
Well, I think wearable technology has the potential to make human beings live longer and live healthier. And I think it can also dramatically decrease healthcare costs in this country and beyond. I think that one massive problem with healthcare is it's focused on curative procedures or practices versus preventative procedures and practices. The preventative stuff is way less expensive, and that's where longevity comes in, that's where health comes in. So if you're able to prevent things from happening by having healthier lifestyles, you save an enormous amount of money in healthcare costs. And I think for the United States and beyond, that's incredibly important. I also believe that every human in the world will be wearing technology to understand their bodies. I mean, I've thought that for 10 years, and it's only feeling more accurate. It's not feeling less accurate. There's been a natural evolution of computers from your desk to your lap to your pocket to on your body, and eventually they'll be in your body.
Oh,
And this is a very natural evolution. It's just you have to embrace it and recognize the positives that can come from it, right? And that is in one way to make human beings perform better and live healthier.
absolutely. I think it's exciting. It certainly needs an open mind to have, a healthier and healthier body. Um, Will Ahmed, CEO, co-founder of Whoop, thank you so much for joining us on Inspired to Move, presented by Degree. It was really great to hear what your thoughts and everything about the company. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.